The story of venture deals, the story of Techstars. The conference room at the Founders Club in Boulder, Colorado, buzzes with nervous energy on a June morning in 2007. 13 startup founders sit around a long table, laptops open, pitch decks ready. They have 10 weeks to transform their half-formed ideas into venture-ready companies. Most venture capital firms would never look at businesses this early. Most accelerators, if they existed at all, would charge tuition. But Techstars is doing something radically different. David Cohen stands at the front of the room. He's 40 years old, a successful entrepreneur who sold his last company and could easily retire to the Colorado mountains he loves. Instead, he's bet his reputation and a significant chunk of his own money on an experiment. Give promising founders a small amount of capital, surround them with mentors, compress years of learning into 3 months, and see what happens. The model seems almost too simple. $6,000 per founder. 5% equity. Access to over 50 mentors who are actual entrepreneurs and investors, not consultants or academics. And something nobody else is offering, a focus on the founders themselves, not just their ideas. This isn't just another startup program. It's the formalization of something Cohen learned over 15 years of building companies in relative obscurity. The best ideas don't win. The best founders do. Founders who can pivot when their initial thesis breaks. Who can recruit when they have no money or brand. Who can sell before they have a product. Who can survive the emotional roller coaster of startup life without quitting or losing their minds. These qualities can't be taught in a classroom. They have to be forged through experience, and that forging process can be accelerated dramatically if you surround someone with people who've been through it before. As the first Techstars cohort begins their journey, Cohen has no idea he's creating a model that will spread to over 500 cities worldwide. He doesn't know that Techstars companies will eventually be valued at over $50 billion. He doesn't know that the phrase "give first" will become a mantra for an entire generation of startup ecosystem builders. All he knows is that the traditional model of venture capital is broken for the earliest stage companies, and someone needs to fix it. The secret wasn't the money. $6,000 barely covered rent in Boulder, let alone Silicon Valley. The secret wasn't the office space or the demo day at the end. The secret was something much more fundamental. Techstars had figured out how to transfer pattern recognition from experienced entrepreneurs to first-time founders at scale. They had built a machine for compressing time. Every mentor session, every office hours conversation, every casual lunch was a data point. What mistakes do first-time founders make repeatedly? What insights separate the companies that scale from those that stall? How do you know when to pivot versus when to persevere? How do you build a team when you can't pay market salaries? How do you prioritize when everything seems urgent? These weren't abstract questions discussed in case studies. They were immediate problems being solved in real time by people who had solved them before. The model worked because it inverted the traditional venture capital relationship. Instead of founders pitching investors and hoping for approval, mentors competed to help companies. Instead of investors taking board seats and controlling decisions, Techstars offered guidance without mandating outcomes. Instead of focusing on the handful of companies that might return the fund, Techstars helped every company get better, knowing that the winners would emerge from a stronger overall cohort. This wasn't charity. It was sophisticated portfolio theory applied to human development. By the end of that first summer, something remarkable had happened. These 13 companies, which 3 months earlier had been little more than ideas and determination, had customers. They had revenue. They had investor interest. Several would go on to raise significant venture capital. One would eventually sell for over $100 million. But more importantly, they had become part of a network that would compound in value over decades. The Techstars model had proven itself. Now the question was whether it could scale. To understand why Techstars emerged when and where it did, you have to understand the world of startup investing in the mid-2000s. Venture capital had been around for decades, but it was designed for a different era. The traditional VC model worked brilliantly for hardware and semiconductor companies that required tens of millions of dollars in capital before generating revenue. It made sense when building a tech company meant buying servers, hiring large engineering teams, and spending years in development before launch. But the internet had changed everything. By 2006, the cost of starting a tech company had collapsed. Amazon Web Services launched that year, meaning you didn't need to buy servers anymore. You could rent computing power by the hour. Open source software meant you didn't need expensive licenses. Outsourcing platforms meant you could hire developers anywhere in the world. Social media and content marketing meant you could reach customers without expensive advertising. A company that would have required $10 million in capital in 1995 could now be started for $50,000 or less. But the venture capital industry hadn't adapted to this new reality. The smallest VC funds were still $100 million or more, which meant they needed to write checks of at least $5 million to make the math work. They couldn't afford to spend time on companies that only needed $50,000 or $100,000. The overhead of due diligence, legal fees, and board participation didn't make economic sense for small investments. There was a massive gap in the market. Thousands of promising companies were emerging that were too small for traditional VCs but too capital-intensive for bootstrapping. Angel investors filled part of this gap, but angel investing had its own problems. Most angels were wealthy individuals who had made money in real estate or other industries. They didn't understand technology. They couldn't help with product development or hiring or go-to-market strategy. They wrote checks and hoped for the best. Even the angels who were former entrepreneurs usually worked alone, meaning founders got one perspective instead of many. And angel investors were geographically concentrated in Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York. If you were starting a company anywhere else, you were largely on your own. A few pioneering programs had started to address this gap. Y Combinator launched in 2005 in Silicon Valley, offering a similar model of small investments and intensive mentorship. But YC was deliberately small and exclusive. They took only a handful of companies per batch. They focused almost entirely on software and internet companies. And they were located in Silicon Valley, which meant you had to move there to participate. For the vast majority of entrepreneurs outside the Bay Area, YC might as well have been on another planet. Into this environment stepped David Cohen, Brad Feld, David Brown, and Jared Polis. They would become the founding team of Techstars, though the roles and relationships evolved significantly over time. Each brought unique elements that would prove essential to what Techstars became. But before they founded Techstars, each had to walk his own path through the software and startup worlds of the 1990s and early 2000s. David Cohen grew up in Detroit, Michigan, in the 1970s. His father was a psychiatrist, his mother a social worker. He learned to code as a teenager, writing programs on early personal computers. This wasn't common. In the late 70s and early 80s, computers were expensive and programming was seen as a niche hobby. But Cohen was obsessed. He loved the logic of code, the way you could build complex systems from simple rules. He also loved the entrepreneurial aspect. Even as a teenager, he was thinking about how to turn programming skills into businesses. He attended the University of Michigan but dropped out after 2 years. He was learning more from building things than from classes. This was 1988, before dropping out of college to start a tech company was romanticized. It was risky and unconventional. But Cohen had conviction. He moved to Boulder, Colorado, drawn by the outdoor lifestyle and a small but growing tech scene. He started a software consulting company called Pinpoint Technologies. The company built custom database applications for businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. Cohen learned how to sell, how to manage projects, how to hire, how to keep clients happy. These were skills he'd use for the rest of his career. Pinpoint grew steadily through the early 90s. By 1994, the company had 20 employees and several $1 million in revenue. Cohen was in his late 20s and running a real business. Then the internet happened. Cohen saw immediately that the web would change everything. He started pivoting Pinpoint toward web applications. In 1999, at the height of the dot-com boom, he sold Pinpoint to a larger company. He was 32 years old and financially independent. He could have retired. Instead, he started another company. iContact was an email marketing platform, launched in 2000. The timing was terrible. The dot-com bubble burst that year, taking down thousands of internet companies. Venture capital dried up. IPOs stopped. But iContact survived because Cohen had learned to build profitable businesses. They focused on small business customers who paid monthly subscriptions. They grew organically, reinvesting revenue into the company. By 2005, iContact had grown into a meaningful business. But Cohen was getting restless. He had been involved in the Boulder startup community for almost 20 years. He had watched hundreds of entrepreneurs start companies. He had advised many of them informally. He had angel invested in a few. He started to notice patterns. The entrepreneurs who succeeded weren't necessarily the ones with the best ideas. They were the ones who could execute. They could sell before they had a product. They could recruit before they had money. They could pivot when the market told them their initial idea was wrong. These were learnable skills, but most entrepreneurs learned them the hard way, through expensive trial and error. Cohen started thinking about how to compress that learning process. What if you could take a first-time founder and surround them with 20 or 30 people who had already built successful companies? What if you could create an environment where they could learn in 3 months what might otherwise take 3 years? What if, instead of learning from their own mistakes, they could learn from other people's mistakes? This was the kernel of the Techstars idea. But Cohen needed partners to make it real. Brad Feld's path to Techstars was different but complementary. Feld grew up in Dallas, Texas, in the 1970s. He was also fascinated by computers from an early age. He learned to program in middle school and spent his teenage years writing software. He attended MIT, studying management science, and graduated in 1987. Unlike Cohen, Feld finished college. But like Cohen, he started building companies immediately after graduating. His first company was Feld Technologies, a custom software development firm similar to Cohen's Pinpoint. Feld built it in Boston, where he stayed after graduating from MIT. The company was successful, growing to several $1 million in revenue. But Feld wanted to do more than build one company. He wanted to build many companies. In the early 90s, he discovered venture capital. He started a firm called Intensity Ventures with a college friend. The fund was small, only a few $1 million, but it gave Feld his first taste of investing. He loved it. He loved meeting entrepreneurs. He loved helping them think through strategy. He loved the portfolio approach, where you could place many bets and learn from all of them. In 1994, Feld sold his software company and joined a larger venture capital firm called SoftBank. He moved to Boulder, Colorado, partly because his wife had gone to graduate school there and loved it, and partly because Boulder had a small but vibrant tech scene that Feld thought could grow. At SoftBank and later at another firm called Mobius Venture Capital, Feld invested in dozens of companies throughout the late 90s and early 2000s. He saw the best and worst of venture capital. He saw entrepreneurs who were brilliant but needed help with basic business skills. He saw companies fail not because the idea was bad but because the founders didn't know how to execute. He saw the geographic concentration of venture capital in Silicon Valley create massive inefficiencies. Great entrepreneurs in other cities couldn't get funded simply because they weren't in the Bay Area. Feld became convinced that venture capital could work differently. Instead of concentrating in one city, it could be distributed. Instead of VCs maintaining information asymmetry and gatekeeping access, they could be transparent and open. Instead of adversarial relationships between investors and founders, there could be genuine partnerships built on trust. These ideas were contrarian in the venture capital world of the early 2000s. But Feld didn't care. He started writing a blog, sharing his thoughts on venture capital, entrepreneurship, and startup communities. He became known for transparency and for the idea of give first, meaning you should help people without expecting anything immediate in return. In 2007, Feld was 40 years old and a well-established venture capitalist. He had invested in dozens of companies and had meaningful success. He was also frustrated. He saw that the traditional venture capital model wasn't serving the thousands of companies that needed $50,000 to $250,000 to get started. These companies were too small for his fund to invest in directly, but they were the future of the tech industry. He started thinking about how to create a new model that would serve this market. When David Cohen approached him about Techstars, Feld immediately saw the potential. David Brown, the third key founder, came from a different background entirely. Brown grew up in Los Angeles and studied computer science at the University of California, San Diego. After graduating in 1992, he moved to Silicon Valley and got a job at Netscape, the company that built the first widely used web browser. This was ground zero for the Internet revolution. Netscape went public in 1995 in one of the most famous IPOs in history. The stock price doubled on the first day. Brown watched as his stock options became worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was 25 years old. The Netscape experience shaped Brown's entire worldview. He saw how quickly technology could create value. He saw how small teams of brilliant engineers could build products used by millions of people. He saw the power of network effects, where each new user made the product more valuable for everyone else. He also saw the dark side of hypergrowth. The pressure to ship features before they were ready. The politics that emerged as the company scaled. The ways that Microsoft crushed Netscape through anti-competitive practices. The eventual sale of Netscape to AOL and the slow death of the company he had helped build. Brown left Netscape in the late 90s and joined a series of startups. Some succeeded, some failed. He learned that the skills required to be a good engineer were different from the skills required to be a good entrepreneur. He learned that most startups fail not because of technology but because of market timing, team dynamics, or inability to sell. He learned that the most important decisions happen in the first year, before anyone is paying attention. He moved to Boulder in the early 2000s, drawn by the lifestyle and the emerging startup scene. He met David Cohen through the local entrepreneur community. Brown had started his own company by this point, called Numerix, which helped businesses analyze and optimize their sales processes. The company was bootstrapped and growing slowly. Brown was consulting and angel investing on the side. When Cohen approached him about Techstars, Brown immediately understood the value. He had seen how much he learned from other entrepreneurs in the Boulder community. He had experienced the power of mentorship from investors who actually understood building products. He knew that if you could concentrate that experience and make it accessible to many companies simultaneously, you could create extraordinary value. The fourth founding team member was Polis, though his role was different from the others. Polis grew up in Boulder. His parents were liberal intellectuals who ran an educational company. Polis went to Princeton, studying politics, and graduated in 1996. He was a prodigy, starting his first company while still in college. The company was called American Information Systems and provided internet access to schools and libraries. It was profitable from day one. After graduation, Polis started more companies. He founded BlueMountain.com, an electronic greeting cards website. This was 1996, extremely early in internet history. The site became one of the most visited websites in the world, with millions of users sending free e-cards for birthdays, holidays, and other occasions. Polis sold the company to Excite at Home in 1999 for over $700 million in stock and cash. He was 24 years old and worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Polis could have retired. Instead, he started investing in other companies and became deeply involved in Colorado politics. He served on the Colorado State Board of Education. He was passionate about improving education, particularly around technology and entrepreneurship. When Cohen and Feld approached him about Techstars, Polis saw it as an extension of his educational mission. He provided initial capital and connections but was not involved in day-to-day operations. His role was important primarily in the first few years, helping Techstars establish credibility and access to capital. The four of them represented a powerful combination. Cohen brought operational experience and deep knowledge of what made founders succeed or fail. Feld brought venture capital experience and a vision for how startup ecosystems could be built outside Silicon Valley. Brown brought product and engineering expertise and a network in Boulder. Polis brought capital, connections, and credibility. Together, they created something none of them could have built alone. The first Techstars program launched in Boulder in summer 2007. The model was straightforward. Accept 10 to 15 companies per batch. Invest around $6,000 per founder, taking about 5% equity. Run the program for 3 months during the summer. Provide office space, bring in mentors, help companies refine their ideas and build their products. Culminate in demo day, where companies pitch to investors. Then let them go raise money and build their businesses. This sounds simple, but every detail mattered. The $6,000 per founder was carefully calculated. It was enough to live on for 3 months in Boulder if you were frugal, but not so much that founders could get comfortable. The scarcity was intentional. It created urgency. The 3-month timeline was also deliberate. Long enough to make real progress, short enough that founders couldn't waste time. The 5% equity stake was high enough that Techstars could make money if companies succeeded, but low enough that founders retained meaningful ownership. Most importantly, taking equity-aligned incentives. Techstars only made money if the company succeeded. This was crucial for building trust. The mentor model was the real innovation. Cohen and Feld recruited over 50 mentors for the first program. These weren't consultants or business school professors. They were entrepreneurs who had started and sold companies, investors who had seen hundreds of startups, executives from larger tech companies who understood how to scale. Each mentor committed to attending at least one Mentor Madness session and being available for office hours throughout the program. Mentor Madness was intense. Every company met with every mentor for 15 minutes. The founders pitched, the mentors gave feedback, then moved to the next company. It was exhausting but incredibly valuable. The feedback was brutally honest in a way that most first-time founders had never experienced. Mentors didn't sugarcoat. If your idea was bad, they told you. If your pitch was confusing, they told you. If your market size assumptions were unrealistic, they told you. This was uncomfortable but essential. Most first-time founders are surrounded by friends and family who are supportive but not knowledgeable. They go months or years believing in flawed ideas because nobody with expertise will tell them the truth. Techstars compressed that process into a few weeks. By the end of Mentor Madness, every company had heard from dozens of experienced people about what needed to change. The structure created a forcing function for rapid iteration. Companies had to update their pitch every few days based on feedback. They had to test new messaging with potential customers. They had to make hard decisions about what to build and what to ignore. The velocity of learning was extraordinary. Cohen had built in another crucial element, which was peer learning. The 13 companies in the first batch spent every day together in the same office space. They ate lunch together, went to happy hours together, complained about their struggles together. This created bonds but also competition. If another company was shipping features faster or signing customers faster, you noticed. The peer pressure to perform was intense in a healthy way. Demo Day was designed to be the culmination. After 3 months of work, each company gave a 5-minute pitch to a room full of investors. The event was invitation only, creating scarcity and FOMO among investors who weren't invited. The pitches were polished because companies had been practicing for weeks. The metrics were real because companies had been building and selling. The energy was electric because everyone in the room could feel the potential. By the end of Demo Day, most companies had multiple investors interested. Several closed funding rounds within weeks. The first batch exceeded everyone's expectations. Every company got better during the program. Several raised significant venture capital. One company called Intense Debate was acquired by Automatic, the company behind WordPress, for several $1 million less than 2 years later. Another company called Socializer pivoted and eventually sold. The financial returns looked promising. But Cohen and Feld knew the real measure of success would take years. Were these companies building sustainable businesses? Were the founders developing into great leaders? Was the Techstars network creating lasting value? They would need to run the program many more times to answer those questions. The success of the first batch validated the model but also created new questions. Could it scale beyond Boulder? Would the model work in other cities with different entrepreneurial cultures? Could Techstars maintain quality as it grew? Should they expand to other stages or industries? These questions would shape the next decade of Techstars' evolution. But first, they needed to refine what they had learned and run more programs in Boulder. The second Techstars Boulder program in summer 2008 was deliberately similar to the first. Cohen and Feld believed in iterative improvement, not radical changes. They kept the core model the same but refined details. They recruited more mentors, adding depth in specific areas like customer acquisition and fundraising. They formalized the curriculum, creating workshops on topics that every company needed to understand. They improved Demo Day, making it more theatrical and memorable. They also started tracking metrics more carefully, measuring how much revenue companies generated during the program, how many raised follow-on funding, how mentors rated each company's progress. One crucial realization from the second batch was the importance of founder compatibility. Several companies in the first 2 batches had co-founder issues. Teams that seemed compatible initially fell apart under pressure. Cohen started paying more attention to team dynamics during the selection process. He developed questions to probe how co-founders made decisions, how they handled disagreements, whether they had complementary skills. He started favoring teams that had worked together before over newly formed teams. This seems obvious in retrospect but was not common practice at the time. Most accelerators and investors focused primarily on the idea and the market, treating the team as a secondary consideration. Techstars inverted this, believing that a great team with a mediocre idea would beat a mediocre team with a great idea almost every time. Another important insight was the value of pre-program relationships. Companies that spent time in Boulder before the program started, getting to know the community and building relationships with mentors, performed better than companies that showed up on day one cold. This led Techstars to create a pre-program phase where accepted companies were encouraged to visit Boulder, meet mentors informally, and start getting feedback before the official start date. This extended the effective program length while maintaining the intensity of the core 3 months. By the end of 2008, Techstars had run 3 programs in Boulder with a total of 39 companies. The model was working. Companies were raising money, hiring employees, generating revenue. More importantly, they were staying in Boulder or returning after raising capital in Silicon Valley. This was creating a flywheel effect. Successful founders from early batches were becoming mentors and angel investors for later batches. They were hiring employees from the Techstars network. They were collaborating on deals and sharing lessons. The Boulder startup ecosystem was becoming noticeably stronger, and Techstars was the catalyst. But Cohen and Feld had always believed Techstars should expand beyond Boulder. The Give First philosophy meant helping as many entrepreneurs as possible, not creating an exclusive club. In 2009, they made the decision to launch Techstars Boston. This was a major test. Boston had a much older and more established startup ecosystem than Boulder. It had deep venture capital markets, world-class universities, and a proud tradition of tech entrepreneurship going back to Route 128 in the 1960s. Would Techstars add value in a city that didn't seem to need help? They recruited Sean Broderick and David Beisel to run Techstars Boston. Both were experienced investors and entrepreneurs with deep roots in the Boston ecosystem. This was crucial. Techstars couldn't parachute into a new city and expect to succeed. They needed local leaders who understood the culture and had credibility with the community. Broderick and Beisel recruited their own mentor network, drawing from Boston's rich ecosystem of founders and investors. They customized aspects of the program for Boston while maintaining the core model. The first Techstars Boston program ran in fall 2009 and was immediately successful. The companies were high quality, the mentors were engaged, and Demo Day attracted significant investor interest. The Boston launch proved that the Techstars model was not dependent on Boulder's unique culture. It could work in different cities with different entrepreneurial traditions. This opened up the possibility of much broader expansion. Over the next several years, Techstars launched programs in Seattle, New York, Austin, and eventually dozens of other cities. Each launch followed a similar pattern. Recruit local managing directors with credibility. Build a mentor network of at least 50 experienced entrepreneurs and investors. Maintain the core program structure while allowing local customization. Create Demo Day that attracts investors. Support the companies long after the program ends. The expansion strategy was deliberate and patient. Techstars didn't try to be in every city immediately. They focused on cities with existing startup activity that could be accelerated. They turned down opportunities to launch in cities that didn't have sufficient foundation. They insisted on finding the right managing directors, even if it meant waiting months or years. This discipline was essential to maintaining quality. The Techstars brand became associated with excellence because they were selective and thoughtful about expansion. As Techstars expanded geographically, they also began experimenting with vertical specialization. The original programs in Boulder and Boston accepted companies from any sector, but by 2010, it was clear that certain industries had unique needs. Hardware and physical product companies had different challenges than software companies. Fintech companies faced regulatory hurdles that consumer internet companies didn't. Healthcare companies needed specialized knowledge about reimbursement and compliance. In 2011, Techstars launched its first industry-specific program focused on mobile and cloud technologies. This was followed by programs in fintech, retail, health tech, music, sports, and many other verticals. Each specialized program brought in mentors with deep domain expertise. A fintech program would have bank executives, compliance attorneys, and payment processing experts. A healthcare program would have doctors, hospital administrators, and FDA specialists. This specialization allowed Techstars to serve companies in complex industries that generic accelerators couldn't help effectively. The vertical programs also opened up a new business model. Large corporations wanted to understand innovation in their industries. They wanted relationships with promising startups. They wanted their employees to think more entrepreneurially. Techstars started partnering with corporations to run industry-specific programs. The corporation would provide capital and office space. Techstars would provide the methodology, mentors, and management. Companies would get access to both Techstars' network and the corporate partners' resources. This corporate partnership model was controversial initially. Some worried it would compromise Techstars' independence or create conflicts of interest. Would startups in a program sponsored by a large bank be pressured to sell to that bank? Would corporations use Techstars programs primarily for deal flow and competitive intelligence? Techstars addressed these concerns through careful program design. The corporate partners had no special rights to invest in or acquire companies. The curriculum was controlled by Techstars, not the corporate partner. Companies owned all their intellectual property. The corporate partner was treated like a large mentor who could provide resources and intros but had no decision-making power. The corporate programs proved valuable for all parties. Corporations got exposure to innovation and relationships with startups they would never have discovered otherwise. Startups got access to customers, distribution channels, and domain expertise. Techstars got capital to expand into new verticals and cities. By 2015, Techstars was running dozens of programs per year across multiple cities and industries. The organization had grown from 3 people in a Boulder office to hundreds of employees managing a global network. This growth created new challenges. How do you maintain culture and quality standards when you're running 50 programs instead of 5? How do you ensure every managing director and mentor understands and lives the Give First philosophy? How do you keep the bureaucracy minimal when you're operating in dozens of countries with different legal and regulatory environments? These were questions Techstars grappled with constantly. They developed detailed playbooks for launching new programs, training managing directors, recruiting mentors, and evaluating companies. They created internal metrics to track program quality beyond just financial returns. They insisted that every new employee go through immersion in the Techstars culture, including attending programs and meeting founders. One crucial decision was to maintain the central Techstars brand rather than allowing each program to develop its own identity. Every program was called Techstars, followed by the city or vertical. This created network effects. A company going through Techstars Boston could connect with alumni from Techstars Boulder or Techstars Seattle. Investors who saw Demo Day in one city would pay attention to companies from other Techstars programs. The unified brand also maintained quality standards. If Techstars put its name on a program, it had to meet certain criteria. By 2016, roughly 10 years after the founding, Techstars had invested in over 1,000 companies across more than 40 programs. The portfolio was generating impressive outcomes. Several companies had achieved valuations over $1 billion, including ClassPass, PillPack, which sold to Amazon for $750 million, SendGrid, which went public with a market cap over $3 billion, and dozens of others that had successful exits or were building large, sustainable businesses. The financial returns were strong, placing Techstars among the top-performing early-stage investors globally. But the impact went far beyond financial returns. Techstars had helped create or strengthen startup ecosystems in dozens of cities. Before Techstars, many cities had small, disconnected entrepreneurial communities. After Techstars, these communities had structure, density, and energy. Entrepreneurs knew each other, shared resources, and supported each other. Mentors who participated in one batch stayed involved for years, helping subsequent companies. Local investors started paying attention to the ecosystem, leading to more capital availability. Universities started teaching entrepreneurship more seriously, inspired by seeing students succeed in Techstars programs. The Give First philosophy spread beyond Techstars. Entrepreneurs who went through the program adopted it, helping others without expecting immediate returns. This created a cultural shift in many cities from zero-sum thinking to abundance mindset. The mentor network became one of Techstars' most valuable assets. By 2016, over 5,000 people had served as Techstars mentors. These weren't passive advisors who showed up for one meeting and disappeared. They were actively engaged, spending hours with companies, making valuable introductions, solving specific problems. The mentors stayed connected to Techstars and to each other, creating a global network of people committed to helping entrepreneurs. Many mentors eventually became investors in Techstars companies, either as angels or by starting their own venture funds. This created additional capital sources for the ecosystem. The alumni network was equally powerful. Over 6,000 founders had gone through Techstars by 2016. They formed a tight-knit community, helping each other with hiring, fundraising, customer intros, and moral support. The relationships formed during the intense 3 months of the program lasted for years. Co-founders from different companies became lifelong friends. Competitors shared strategies and tactics because they were part of the same Techstars family. This network effect was difficult to quantify but immensely valuable. When a Techstars founder needed help, they could reach out to thousands of people who would respond simply because of the shared experience. Techstars also had broader impact on the startup industry structure. The Accelerator model at Techstars and Y Combinator pioneered became standard. By 2016, there were hundreds of accelerators globally, many explicitly copying the Techstars model. This created more options for entrepreneurs and increased competition for the best companies. Techstars maintained its position by staying true to its core principles, maintaining high-quality standards, and continually evolving. They introduced new features like venture capital funds that could invest larger amounts in later rounds, allowing Techstars to continue supporting companies as they scaled. They created programs for later-stage companies that needed help with specific challenges like international expansion or enterprise sales. They built software tools to help manage the accelerator process and share lessons across programs. Let me continue with the rest of the story. The evolution of Techstars between 2016 and 2023 reveals both the power and limitations of the accelerator model. During this period, the startup funding environment went through dramatic changes. The rise of mega funds deploying billions of dollars, the explosion of seed-stage investing, the growth of corporate venture capital, and the emergence of new funding sources like ICOs and token sales all reshaped the landscape Techstars operated in. The organization had to adapt continuously while maintaining its core identity. One significant challenge was the changing economics of early-stage investing. When Techstars launched in 2007, getting into a top accelerator was one of the few ways for a first-time founder to access capital and expertise. By 2018, there were multiple paths. Angel syndicates, crowdfunding platforms, venture capital firms doing pre-seed investments, corporate accelerators, and a proliferation of competitors all vied for the same companies. The selection process became more competitive. Techstars had to work harder to attract the best founders, who now had many options. Techstars responded by leaning into its differentiators. The mentor network remained unmatched. While other accelerators might have 10 or 20 mentors, Techstars programs typically had over 100, with deep expertise across every functional area a startup might need. The global network was also unique. A founder in Techstars Berlin could connect with alumni and mentors in Techstars New York or Tokyo. The give-first culture created trust that was difficult for newer accelerators to replicate. And the track record spoke for itself. Thousands of successful companies had gone through Techstars, providing proof of the model's effectiveness. The investment terms also evolved. The original $6,000 per founder was no longer sufficient given inflation and increased cost of living in many cities. By 2018, Techstars was typically investing $120,000 for 6% equity. This was more aligned with market rates for pre-seed investment, though still modest compared to standalone venture rounds. Some programs offered convertible notes rather than equity, giving companies more flexibility. The specifics varied by program and geography, but the core principle remained: enough capital to allow founders to focus full-time during the program, structured in a way that aligned Techstars with long-term company success. Techstars also grappled with the question of what came after the accelerator. Most companies that completed Techstars went on to raise seed or Series A rounds from venture capital firms. But Techstars only owned a small percentage of equity and wasn't structured to lead follow-on rounds. This meant they couldn't support companies as they scaled, and their returns were capped by their initial investment size. In 2015, Techstars launched a venture capital fund specifically to invest in later rounds of Techstars companies. This fund could write checks of $500,000 to $2 million in Series A and B rounds, allowing Techstars to increase ownership in the best companies and capture more of the upside. The venture fund was managed separately from the accelerator programs but leveraged the same network. Portfolio managers could see deal flow from across all Techstars programs globally. They had deep insight into company progress because of ongoing relationships with founders. They could move quickly because of existing trust. The fund performed well, generating strong returns while supporting Techstars companies at a critical growth stage. It also created a full lifecycle relationship where Techstars could support companies from inception through exit. Another strategic evolution was international expansion. Techstars started in the US, but the startup phenomenon was global. By 2020, Techstars had programs running in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Each geography presented unique challenges. Regulatory environments differed. Investment norms varied. Cultural attitudes toward failure and entrepreneurship diverged significantly. A program structure that worked perfectly in Boulder or Boston might need adaptation in Berlin or Bangalore. The international expansion required patient, methodical work. Techstars would typically partner with local organizations that understood the ecosystem before launching in a new country. They would spend months recruiting managing directors and mentors. They would study what worked in other markets and what needed customization. For example, in some Asian markets, the emphasis on respecting authority meant that the brutally direct feedback style used in American programs needed to be softened. In some European markets, founders were more focused on sustainable growth than rapid scaling, requiring different metrics and expectations. Despite these adaptations, Techstars maintained certain non-negotiable elements globally. Every program ran for approximately 3 months. Every program emphasized mentorship over lectures. Every program culminated in demo day. Every program used the give first philosophy. These constants ensured that the Techstars experience was recognizable whether you were in Tel Aviv or Toronto. They also allowed learnings to transfer across geographies. A managing director in London could learn from experiments in Austin or Singapore. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 forced another major adaptation. When lockdowns began in March 2020, Techstars had programs running in dozens of cities with hundreds of companies that suddenly couldn't meet in person. The entire model depended on physical proximity, informal conversations, spontaneous collaborations, and the energy of working alongside other founders. How could this work remotely? Techstars moved quickly to virtual programming. Demo days became Zoom webinars. Mentor sessions happened over video calls. Office hours shifted online. The cohort bonding that normally happened over lunches and happy hours was facilitated through virtual social events, Slack channels, and structured networking sessions. It was imperfect. Everyone missed the serendipity and energy of in-person interaction. But it worked better than anyone expected. Companies still made progress. Mentors stayed engaged. Investors still showed up to demo days, perhaps in even greater numbers because they didn't need to travel. The pandemic experience taught Techstars that elements of the program could be virtualized without significant loss of effectiveness. Some mentor sessions were actually better on Zoom because busy executives could participate for 30 minutes without commuting across a city. Demo days reached larger audiences when broadcast online. Companies from different programs could connect more easily in virtual environments. When in-person programs resumed in 2021, Techstars maintained certain virtual elements, creating a hybrid model that combined the best of both approaches. The pandemic also accelerated trends that were already emerging in the startup world. Remote work became normalized overnight. Companies that previously required all employees in one office suddenly had distributed teams across continents. This opened up new talent pools. A company in Techstars Boulder could hire engineers in Eastern Europe or designers in South America without anyone thinking it was unusual. This leveled the playing field somewhat between Silicon Valley and other locations. Geography still mattered for access to capital and certain networks, but it mattered less than before. Throughout this evolution, certain investments and company stories defined what Techstars represented. One of the earliest and most emblematic was SendGrid, which went through Techstars Boulder in 2009. SendGrid provided email infrastructure for developers, solving the complex technical problems around email deliverability, spam filtering, and scaling. The company was founded by Isaac Saldana, Jose Lopez, and Tim Jenkins, 3 engineers who had experienced email problems firsthand at previous jobs. When SendGrid joined Techstars, they had a basic product but limited traction. During the program, they refined their pricing model, built relationships with key customers, and developed their go-to-market strategy. The mentorship was crucial. They met with executives from Automatic, Foundry Group, and other successful tech companies who helped them think through scaling challenges. They connected with early customers through the Techstars network. By demo day, they had real revenue and clear product market fit. After Techstars, SendGrid raised a seed round, then a Series A, then multiple later stage rounds. They grew to over 300 employees and processed billions of emails per month for customers like Uber, Airbnb, and Spotify. The company went public in November 2017 at a valuation of over $2 billion. It was later acquired by Twilio for $3 billion in 2019. For Techstars, which had invested a small amount at a minimal valuation, the returns were extraordinary. But more important than the financial outcome was what SendGrid represented. The company proved that developer tools businesses built in Boulder could compete globally. It validated the Techstars model of intensive mentorship leading to rapid progress. And it created a success story that attracted future founders to apply to Techstars. Another defining investment was ClassPass, which went through Techstars Boston in 2011. The company was founded by Payal Kadakia, who wanted to make fitness classes more accessible and discoverable. The original idea was a search engine for classes, but during and after Techstars, the concept evolved into a subscription model where users could access multiple studios with one membership. This pivot was directly influenced by Techstars mentors who challenged the initial business model and helped Kadakia think through unit economics and customer behavior. ClassPass scaled rapidly after Techstars, raising over $300 million in venture capital. The company grew to millions of subscribers across dozens of countries. It faced numerous challenges including difficult studio relationships, complex marketplace dynamics, and intense competition. Kadakia stepped down as CEO in 2017 though remained involved. The company was eventually valued at over $1 billion and merged with MindBody in a complex transaction. The ClassPass story illustrated both the potential and challenges of marketplace businesses. It showed how an idea could transform dramatically based on market feedback. And it demonstrated the importance of founder resilience, as Kadakia navigated multiple pivots and near-death experiences. PillPack represented another category of Techstars success. The company went through Techstars Boston in 2011, founded by T.J. Parker and Elliot Cohen. Parker's father was a pharmacist, and Parker had seen firsthand how difficult it was for people managing multiple prescriptions to stay organized. PillPack created a service that sorted medications into prepackaged doses organized by date and time, then delivered them to customers' homes. This seemingly simple innovation required solving complex problems around pharmacy licensing, insurance relationships, medication management, and logistics. During Techstars, PillPack refined their customer acquisition strategy and built relationships with early patients who provided invaluable feedback. The mentorship helped them navigate the regulatory complexity of the pharmacy industry. After Techstars, PillPack raised significant venture capital from firms like CRV and Founder Collective. They scaled to hundreds of employees and tens of thousands of customers. In June 2018, Amazon acquired PillPack for just under $750 million, marking Amazon's major entry into healthcare. The acquisition validated PillPack's model and generated substantial returns for Techstars and other early investors. These success stories created a powerful flywheel. Each major exit generated attention for Techstars, making it easier to recruit the next cohort of exceptional founders. The successful founders often became mentors themselves, strengthening the network. They angel invested in newer Techstars companies, providing additional capital. They hired employees from the Techstars community, creating job opportunities. And their stories became case studies that helped future founders understand what was possible. But Techstars' impact wasn't limited to unicorns and major exits. Thousands of companies that went through the program built solid, profitable businesses without ever raising large venture rounds or achieving massive valuations. These companies created jobs, served customers, and generated returns for founders and investors. Many would argue these companies represented the healthier and more sustainable model compared to venture-backed startups chasing exponential growth. Techstars supported both paths, recognizing that entrepreneurial success takes many forms. One such example was Sphero, which went through Techstars Boulder in 2010. The company built robotic toys controlled by smartphones, starting with a ball that could roll around controlled by tilting your phone. The founders, Ian Bernstein, Adam Wilson, and Brad Bower, were robotics enthusiasts who wanted to make robotics accessible and fun. During Techstars, they refined the product, connected with potential manufacturing partners, and developed relationships with retailers. The mentorship around hardware manufacturing proved invaluable, as this was before the maker movement made hardware entrepreneurship more accessible. Sphero raised venture capital after Techstars and launched products that achieved mainstream success. They partnered with Disney to create BB-8, the adorable droid from Star Wars: The Force Awakens, as a toy. The BB-8 toy became a massive hit, selling millions of units. This success funded Sphero's expansion into educational robotics, where they built programmable robots that taught kids coding. The company navigated multiple pivots, moving from consumer toys to education products as market dynamics shifted. By 2023, Sphero was profitable and independent, having bought back shares from investors to regain control. The company represented a different kind of success story, one focused on building a lasting business rather than maximizing short-term valuation. Not every Techstars company succeeded. The failure rate for early-stage startups is high regardless of accelerator participation. Many Techstars companies shut down within a few years. Some failed because the market wasn't ready. Some because the founders couldn't work well together. Some because they ran out of capital before achieving sustainability. Some because competitors moved faster. Some because the founding team lost motivation or faced personal challenges. Techstars was transparent about these failures, seeing them as learning opportunities rather than embarrassments. One instructive failure was a company from Techstars Seattle in 2012 that was building tools for real-time collaboration on documents. The product was technically impressive and had enthusiastic early users. But the company faced intense competition from Google Docs, Dropbox Paper, and eventually Microsoft as they improved Office 365. The founders struggled to differentiate their offering or find a niche that larger companies wouldn't dominate. After several pivots and attempts to find product-market fit, the company shut down in 2015. The founders returned remaining capital to investors and moved on to other opportunities. The lessons learned about competing with incumbents, the importance of distribution, and the difficulty of building collaboration tools informed both the founders' next ventures and Techstars' evaluation of future companies in this space. Another category of outcome was acqui-hires, where companies were acquired primarily for their teams rather than their products. This was common in competitive talent markets where large tech companies would pay millions of dollars to acquire small startups just to hire the engineers. Some viewed acqui-hires as failures, since the original product and vision were typically abandoned. Others saw them as reasonable outcomes that generated returns for investors and good opportunities for founders. Techstars took the latter view, recognizing that founder success could take many forms. The learnings from thousands of companies across all outcome categories informed how Techstars evaluated and helped future cohorts. They developed increasingly sophisticated frameworks for assessing founder quality, market timing, competitive positioning, and scalability. They built rubrics for different types of businesses, recognizing that evaluating a hardware startup required different criteria than evaluating a SaaS business or a marketplace. They tracked what mentorship activities correlated most strongly with success, discovering that certain types of mentor relationships were far more valuable than others. One key insight was the importance of founder market fit. The best outcomes came when founders had deep domain expertise in the problem they were solving. T.J. Parker starting PillPack made sense because his father was a pharmacist and he understood the pharmacy world intimately. Isaac Saldana starting SendGrid made sense because he had experienced email deliverability problems as an engineer. Payal Kadakia starting ClassPass made sense because she was passionate about fitness and experienced the class discovery problem firsthand. This wasn't always apparent during the application process, but Techstars learned to probe deeply into founders' backgrounds and motivations. Another insight was that the best founders had irrational commitment to their problem space. They weren't opportunistically chasing a hot market. They were obsessively focused on solving a specific problem that bothered them. They would keep working on this problem even if their current approach failed. This perseverance was often more predictive of success than initial traction or the sophistication of the first product. Techstars started asking questions during the application process designed to reveal this level of commitment. Why this problem? How long have you been thinking about it? What would you do if this specific approach doesn't work? The answers revealed whether founders were missionaries or mercenaries. The selection process became increasingly refined over the years. Initially, Techstars accepted roughly 10% of applicants, similar to acceptance rates at top universities. As the applicant pool grew and quality increased, the acceptance rate dropped below 5% for the most competitive programs. The selection involved multiple stages. First, a written application including questions about the company, team, traction, and vision. The best applications advanced to video interviews where managing directors could assess team dynamics and communication skills. Finalists were invited for in-person or virtual interviews with multiple people including managing directors, mentors, and sometimes alumni. The final selection considered the company's potential, the founder quality, and also the cohort composition. Cohort composition mattered because companies learned from each other. A cohort with all enterprise SaaS companies would create less diverse learning than a cohort with mix of business models, industries, and customer types. Techstars deliberately constructed cohorts with diversity across multiple dimensions while maintaining a high-quality bar. They wanted founders who could help each other, which meant having some commonality but also complementary perspectives and experiences. The curriculum also evolved significantly from the early days. Initially, Techstars was loosely structured with mentorship being the primary component. Over time, they added workshops on critical topics that every founder needed to understand. These workshops covered fundraising mechanics, how to tell your company story, customer development methodologies, growth marketing, hiring and team building, financial modeling, and legal structures. The workshops were taught by practitioners, not academics, and were highly interactive with founders presenting their specific situations and getting feedback. One particularly valuable workshop focused on storytelling and narrative. Many technical founders could build excellent products but struggled to explain why those products mattered. They got lost in features and technical details rather than articulating the customer problem and value proposition. Techstars brought in communications experts who helped founders craft clear, compelling narratives. The exercise of distilling a company's essence into a 2-minute pitch forced clarity of thinking. Founders who could tell their story clearly were much more successful at recruiting employees, attracting investors, and selling to customers. The demo day preparation was intense. Companies practiced their pitches dozens of times over several weeks. They received feedback from managing directors, mentors, professional pitch coaches, and each other. Every word was scrutinized. Every slide was refined. The goal was a pitch that was clear, compelling, memorable, and authentic. Bad pitches are confusing, overly technical, or boring. Great pitches tell a story that makes the audience care about the problem, believe the solution is inevitable, and trust that this team is uniquely positioned to execute. Demo Day itself became an increasingly sophisticated production. In the early years, it was held in local venues with maybe 100 to 200 investors attending. By 2020, the major demo days attracted over 1,000 attendees including top-tier venture capitalists, corporate development teams, angel investors, and media. The production quality was professional with lighting, video, and stage management. Companies presented in a carefully choreographed order designed to maintain energy and showcase diversity. The entire event lasted about 3 hours, with each company getting exactly 5 minutes including setup time. There was no Q&A during presentations. Instead, investors could approach companies during breaks or schedule meetings afterward. The effectiveness of Demo Day was measured by how many companies received investor interest and subsequently closed funding rounds. By 2020, roughly 70% of companies that went through Techstars raised additional capital within 6 months of completing the program. This was far higher than the baseline rate for early-stage companies and validated that the Techstars experience made companies significantly more investable. Some of this was signal, investors trusting the Techstars selection process. But much of it was genuine improvement. Companies that completed Techstars really were better prepared to scale than companies at similar stages that hadn't gone through an accelerator. The post-program support became increasingly important as the Techstars network grew. Alumni had access to ongoing mentorship, exclusive events, follow-on funding from Techstars' own funds, customer and partner introductions, and a global community of founders facing similar challenges. Techstars created regional meetups where alumni could connect. They hosted annual founder conferences bringing together thousands of Techstars founders for learning and networking. They built software platforms where founders could ask questions and get advice from alumni. This long-term support made Techstars more than just a 3-month program. It was a lifelong network. The alumni support extended to later stage challenges that early-stage accelerators typically didn't address. When a Techstars company reached 20 employees and needed to formalize HR practices, they could connect with alumni who had done that. When they were ready for Series B fundraising, they could get intros to growth stage investors through the network. When they faced crisis situations like co-founder departure or major customer loss, they could get confidential advice from founders who had survived similar challenges. This comprehensive support system was a major competitive advantage over newer accelerators with smaller networks. Techstars also experimented with alternative program formats beyond the traditional 3-month accelerator. They launched Techstars Startup Weekend, a 54-hour event where people could pitch ideas, form teams, build prototypes, and present to judges. These weekend events happened in hundreds of cities globally and introduced tens of thousands of people to entrepreneurship. Many companies that eventually went through full Techstars programs started at Startup Weekend events. They also created Techstars Startup Week, week-long festivals of entrepreneurship in various cities featuring workshops, panels, networking, and competitions. These events built community and deal flow while spreading the Techstars brand. Another experiment was Techstars Access, a platform that allowed accredited investors to invest alongside Techstars in their portfolio companies. This democratized access to early-stage deals that were typically only available to well-connected angels or venture firms. Investors could invest as little as $5,000 and get exposure to entire cohorts rather than picking individual companies. For Techstars, this created additional capital sources for portfolio companies while deepening relationships with potential future mentors and supporters. By 2023, Techstars had invested in over 3,700 companies across all its programs globally. The combined valuation of the portfolio exceeded $50 billion. Over 1,000 companies had achieved successful exits through acquisitions or IPOs. The companies had created over 100,000 jobs globally. They had raised more than $30 billion in follow-on funding. These numbers were impressive but still understated the full impact. Many successful companies had emerged from ecosystems that Techstars helped create. Mentors who participated in Techstars programs went on to start their own firms. Founders who went through the program inspired others to start companies. The Give First philosophy spread far beyond the formal Techstars network. The broader impact on startup ecosystems was perhaps the most important legacy. Before Techstars and similar accelerators, starting a tech company outside of Silicon Valley was extremely difficult. Capital was scarce. Mentorship was unavailable. Talent was limited. The infrastructure simply didn't exist. By 2020, dozens of cities had thriving startup ecosystems with local venture capital, experienced mentors, strong universities feeding talent into startups, and vibrant founder communities. Techstars wasn't solely responsible for this transformation, but it was a major catalyst in many cities. The Boulder ecosystem, in particular, was transformed from a small collection of entrepreneurs in the early 2000s to one of the top startup cities in the US by the 2020s. The evolution of Boulder illustrated how accelerators could strengthen entire ecosystems. Before Techstars, Boulder had successful tech companies like Rally Software, but the ecosystem was fragmented. After Techstars, the community became much denser and more connected. Successful founders from companies like SendGrid and Sphero became investors and mentors for the next generation. Venture capital firms opened Boulder offices specifically because of the deal flow Techstars created. The University of Colorado became more entrepreneurial as students saw startup success stories in their backyard. The local government became more supportive, recognizing that startups created jobs and economic growth. Within 10 years, Boulder had one of the highest concentrations of startups per capita in the United States, and Techstars was the nucleus of that ecosystem. This playbook was replicated in other cities with varying success. The most successful ecosystem transformations happened in cities that already had certain foundational elements: research universities producing technical talent, some existing tech companies providing experienced employees who could start new companies, local capital or connections to capital centers, and a culture that accepted failure as part of innovation. Cities without these foundations struggled to build sustainable ecosystems even with an accelerator present. Techstars learned to be selective about where they launched programs, focusing on cities with potential rather than trying to create ecosystems from scratch. The relationship between Techstars and traditional venture capital evolved over the years. Initially, some VCs viewed accelerators as competitors that might disintermediate them. Why would entrepreneurs need VC firms if accelerators provided capital and support? But this concern proved unfounded. Accelerators actually made the venture capital industry more efficient. They provided initial capital and de-risked companies, making them more attractive for Series A investment. They improved company quality through mentorship and curriculum. They created dense networks of companies that VCs could evaluate in batches. Many VCs started treating accelerators like sourcing and screening functions. The most sophisticated venture capital firms developed formal relationships with accelerators. They would attend every demo day, meet with every cohort, and invest in the best companies. Some VCs became mentors, providing expertise while building relationships with founders before making investment decisions. Others created special programs offering streamlined term sheets to accelerator graduates. The relationship became symbiotic. Accelerators needed VCs to provide follow-on capital. VCs needed accelerators to generate high-quality deal flow. Both benefited from the partnership. Techstars also influenced how venture capital firms operated. The emphasis on mentorship and value-add beyond capital became an industry standard. VCs increasingly marketed themselves based on portfolio services, operator networks, and platform resources they could offer. The expectation that investors should help companies, not just write checks and sit on boards, became the norm. This shift was partly driven by competition among VCs but also by the example accelerators set. If Techstars could mobilize hundreds of mentors to help companies without taking board seats or large ownership stakes, surely VCs with more capital and ownership could do the same. The financial model of accelerators became a subject of debate as the industry matured. Techstars invested small amounts for small equity stakes in many companies. This portfolio approach meant they needed only a few big winners to generate strong returns. The math worked if even 5% of companies had successful exits. But the model also had limitations. The small ownership stakes meant Techstars couldn't fully capture the upside from their biggest winners. If a company they had 5% of sold for $1 billion, Techstars made $50 million, which was excellent but far less than investors with larger stakes earned. To maximize returns, Techstars needed to invest in follow-on rounds and increase ownership in the best companies. This tension between running an accelerator and maximizing investment returns shaped Techstars' strategy. The accelerator business was valuable for brand building, deal flow, and ecosystem development but had natural limitations on financial returns. The venture capital funds that invested in later rounds had potential for much larger returns but were playing the traditional VC game with established competition. Techstars had to balance both sides, using the accelerator to source opportunities and the funds to capture upside, while maintaining the mission of helping entrepreneurs. The leadership of Techstars also evolved significantly over the years. David Cohen remained deeply involved as a co-founder but handed day-to-day operations to professional CEOs as the organization grew. Brad Feld transitioned from active involvement to advisory roles, focusing on his venture capital work at Foundry Group while staying connected to Techstars' strategic direction. David Brown pursued other entrepreneurial interests while staying involved as a mentor. Jared Polis was elected to Congress in 2008 and later became governor of Colorado in 2019, limiting his involvement though maintaining philosophical alignment with Techstars. The transition from founder-led to professionally managed was critical for scaling. Techstars brought in executives with experience building global organizations. They hired regional directors to manage geographic expansion. They created specialized roles for curriculum development, mentor recruitment, corporate partnerships, and alumni engagement. This professionalization was necessary for growth but also created challenges. How do you maintain startup culture and entrepreneurial spirit as you become a large organization? How do you preserve the give first philosophy when you have hundreds of employees who weren't there at the beginning? These questions required constant attention. Techstars addressed culture challenges through deliberate choices. They maintained flat organizational structures where possible. They encouraged employees to think like entrepreneurs, taking risks and learning from failures. They made sure leadership remained accessible and transparent. They brought new employees to programs to experience the magic of demo day and the intensity of the cohort experience. They told and retold the origin stories, keeping the founding vision alive. And they measured success not just by financial metrics but by founder satisfaction, ecosystem impact, and network health. The competitive landscape around accelerators changed dramatically from 2007 to 2023. When Techstars launched, there were maybe 5 or 10 legitimate accelerators globally. By 2020, there were thousands, ranging from high-quality programs backed by top VCs to low-quality programs that charged fees or took excessive equity. This proliferation created confusion for founders and diluted the accelerator brand. Founders had difficulty distinguishing between programs that added real value and those that were exploitative or ineffective. Techstars maintained its position through reputation, network, and consistent quality. The track record of successful companies spoke for itself. The alumni network was unmatched except by Y Combinator. The mentor density couldn't be replicated by newer programs. The global reach gave Techstars unique advantages. And the give first philosophy, genuinely practiced over 15 years, created trust that competitors couldn't immediately copy. But maintaining these advantages required constant work. Every program needed to deliver value. Every cohort needed to produce successful companies. Every interaction with founders needed to reinforce why Techstars was different. The relationship between Techstars and Y Combinator was particularly interesting. YC had launched 2 years before Techstars and established many of the accelerator model's core elements. Both organizations respected each other while competing for the best companies. The competition was generally friendly, with occasional public tension. Both organizations had successful companies claiming superiority based on selective metrics. The reality was that both added immense value to the startup ecosystem and both had differentiated strengths. Y Combinator focused on scale and efficiency, accepting large batches of companies twice per year and running a highly standardized program. Techstars focused on local ecosystem development and ran many smaller programs tailored to specific cities and industries. YC was concentrated in Silicon Valley with online programs expanding reach. Techstars was distributed globally with local managing directors. YC had higher acceptance standards and probably attracted slightly better average company quality. Techstars provided more hands-on support and customization. Both models worked. Founders choosing between them were making legitimate trade-offs based on priorities. The broader impact on entrepreneurial culture was profound. The accessibility of accelerators made entrepreneurship more democratic. You didn't need to be wealthy or well-connected to start a company. You needed a good idea, credible execution ability, and the willingness to go through an intensive program. This lowered barriers significantly. People from diverse backgrounds who never would have considered entrepreneurship saw it as possible. The representation of women and underrepresented minorities in tech entrepreneurship increased, though still not to levels matching population demographics. Accelerators actively worked on improving diversity, recognizing both the moral imperative and business case for supporting entrepreneurs from all backgrounds. Techstars specifically created programs focused on increasing diversity. They launched initiatives supporting women founders, underrepresented minority founders, and founders from developing countries. They tracked diversity metrics across their portfolio and held themselves accountable for progress. They recognized that pattern matching based on previous successful founders naturally led to bias. If most successful tech entrepreneurs historically were white men from Stanford or MIT, using pattern matching to select new founders would perpetuate this dynamic. Breaking the pattern required deliberate effort to look beyond traditional credentials and find exceptional founders wherever they existed. The results were measurable. By 2020, roughly 40% of Techstars companies had at least one female founder, compared to less than 20% industry average. The percentage of founders from underrepresented minorities was higher in Techstars than in venture-backed startups generally. Companies from developing countries had successful exits and scaling trajectories comparable to companies from traditional tech hubs. This demonstrated that talent was globally distributed even if opportunity was not. By providing access and support, accelerators could help correct market inefficiencies in capital allocation. The future of Techstars and accelerators more broadly remains uncertain. The model has proven valuable over 15 years but faces ongoing challenges. The proliferation of capital in early-stage investing means founders have more options. The rise of remote work reduces the importance of geographic concentration. The increasing sophistication of first-time founders who learn from online resources means they need less basic education. The maturation of startup ecosystems in many cities reduces the need for external catalysts. All these trends suggest that the value proposition of accelerators may need to evolve. Techstars has adapted by focusing on areas where they still provide unique value. Deep domain expertise in specialized verticals is difficult for founders to access independently. The global network enables international expansion that founders couldn't easily manage alone. The brand opens doors with customers, partners, and investors. The community provides psychological support during the difficult early stages. These elements remain valuable even as other aspects of the accelerator model become commoditized. Looking at Techstars today, several things stand out. The organization has maintained remarkable consistency in mission while evolving constantly in execution. The Give First philosophy articulated in 2007 still guides decision-making in 2023. The focus on people over ideas remains central to selection and support. The network effects have compounded over 16 years into a truly global community. The impact extends far beyond financial returns to include ecosystem development, cultural change, and democratization of entrepreneurship. The lessons from Techstars' journey are applicable beyond the accelerator industry. The importance of culture and values in scaling organizations. The power of network effects and long-term thinking. The need to maintain quality while growing. The value of transparency and openness. The possibility of creating win-win relationships where helping others generates business success. These lessons resonate across industries and contexts. One of the most important patterns in the Techstars story is the compounding nature of reputation and relationships. The early investments in companies like SendGrid and ClassPass created success stories that attracted better founders to later programs. Those founders became mentors and investors, strengthening the network. The mentors told other experienced entrepreneurs about Techstars, expanding the mentor pool. The investors who saw successful companies at demo day returned for subsequent demo days. This flywheel accelerated over time. Year 5 was easier than Year 1 because of the foundation built in the previous 4 years. Year 10 was easier than Year 5 for the same reason. This compounding also applied to knowledge and pattern recognition. Every cohort taught Techstars something about what made companies succeed or fail. These lessons informed how they selected and helped future cohorts. The curriculum improved based on feedback from hundreds of founders about what was most valuable. The mentor matching became more sophisticated as they learned which types of mentors helped which types of companies. The post-program support evolved based on understanding what challenges founders faced at different stages. This institutional learning created advantages that competitors couldn't quickly replicate. Another key lesson is the importance of aligned incentives. Techstars worked because the organization only made money when companies succeeded. This aligned incentives between Techstars and founders perfectly. Many competitor programs charged fees or took excessive equity, creating misaligned incentives. Techstars also maintained alignment with mentors by asking them to give time without direct compensation. Mentors participated because they believed in helping entrepreneurs, wanted to stay connected to innovation, and enjoyed the intellectual stimulation. This volunteer model meant mentors were intrinsically motivated, leading to higher quality engagement. The role of place and community in Techstars' success deserves emphasis. Startups are intensely social enterprises. Founders need peers who understand their challenges. They need communities where entrepreneurial thinking is normalized. They need environments where ambition is celebrated rather than seen as arrogance. Techstars created these environments deliberately in each city where they launched. The office spaces were designed to encourage collaboration. The events brought people together regularly. The culture celebrated both successes and failures as learning opportunities. This sense of belonging was often as valuable to founders as the mentorship or capital. The mythology and storytelling around Techstars also mattered. Every organization has stories that convey values and inspire behavior. Techstars had many such stories. The story of David Cohen convincing Brad Feld to join the founding team. The story of SendGrid nearly running out of money before their breakthrough. The story of a mentor spending a weekend helping a company solve a critical technical problem. These stories weren't just entertaining. They communicated what Techstars stood for and what was expected of participants. New founders joining Techstars learned these stories and internalized the values they represented. The contrast between Techstars' philosophy and traditional venture capital is instructive. Traditional VC is often described as a power law business where one or two investments return the entire fund and everything else barely matters. This leads to a certain ruthlessness in portfolio management. Companies that aren't on track for massive outcomes get deprioritized. Founders who aren't meeting milestones get replaced. The relationship between investors and founders can become adversarial when interests diverge. Techstars took a different approach, treating every company with respect and providing support regardless of trajectory. This wasn't just altruism. It was enlightened self-interest. You can't always predict which companies will succeed. The company that looks mediocre in year 1 might pivot and become huge in year 3. The founder who struggles initially might learn and become an exceptional CEO. Maintaining relationships with everyone meant Techstars captured upside from unexpected winners. The give first philosophy also created network effects that pure financial calculation couldn't capture. When a Techstars founder experienced the value of mentorship, they wanted to pay it forward. When they became successful, they volunteered as mentors for future cohorts. They made introductions for other Techstars companies. They invested in Techstars companies as angels. This generosity multiplied the impact of the organization far beyond what the core team could achieve alone. It also created a culture that attracted people who valued community and impact alongside financial returns.